Hello, this is my variables video. Let's just get into it. A variable, by definition, is a name that represents a value stored in the computer's memory. Now, there are a bunch of different types of variables, with the first one being ints, or integers, which are numbers that do not have any decimals in them. If they have a decimal in them, they'll be considered a float, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Now, an int can be created by typing the variable name, then an equal sign, and then a number. Make sure there's no quotations marks around the number, because then it'll be a string, and then you can't use it for math or anything. An example of an int would be 1, the word 1 equals 1, the number. A little confusing, but there you go. And the reason why ints are important is because they're probably the most useful variable type, because you can use them for a lot of different purposes, mainly being basic math, but also if you're making a game, you need them for basically any sort of movement, because they're one of the only ones where you can add and subtract. Now, you can use floats too, but I think ints usually are better because I don't know why you'd be using decimals for moving. And as I said, unlike most other variables, you can add or take away from them. Now on to floats. Floats are essentially the same thing, but have decimals in them. If you have a decimal in a number, then it'll become a float instantly. And they're basically the same. They basically have the same uses as ints, but you could probably use them. Their main use is probably for more complicated math that needs decimals or more exact values in math, or maybe you're trying to make something move at a very specific speed, so you make it a float instead of an int. So yeah. Next, we have strings, which are words with letters that can be displayed as sentences, but cannot be used for any mathematical equations or anything else. Now in a string, it can be anything. You have numbers in a string, but you can't use them for math. They'll just be displayed there and essentially have no other use. And the way you make a string is you type the variable name, then equals, then quotation marks, and then what you want inside the quotation marks. You can essentially put almost anything inside those quotation marks, except for very few things. I think there's some characters, like, what are they called? I forget the name. It's the ones that already have like a set design by Python. I think can't put some of those, but you can essentially put anything in a string. But if you do put a number in it, warning, you can't use it for any mathematical equations. It just won't work because it's a string. And the number 1 equals quotation mark high quotation mark is an example of a string, and you can only use that for printing it essentially. Now a list. A list is a variable that can store multiple other variables or also just multiple other numbers or strings, and it just stores a bunch of them at once. Now, the main reason you would want to use this is that it can organize your code a lot more and make it a lot easier to make games. Like if you want to do a bunch of stuff, it's a lot easier to use a list, and also mainly for organizing. Now, you can create one by typing your variable name, then an equals, then a square bracket, and then whatever variables or strings or numbers you want inside of it, then another square bracket. An example of a list would be numbers equals square bracket 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, comma 5, and then another square bracket. Now, the tuples are the same as lists, except they can't be changed. You can edit lists throughout your code. Like, you can add, if there's numbers inside of them, you can add to them. If there's variables that have numbers, you can also add to them, or you can just change the variables or the list. But a tuple, you cannot change it. So if you would want to use this if you don't want your lists to be changed at all. So you instead make it a tuple. Now, the way you make these is the same thing as list, except you use two normal brackets instead of parentheses, which you use for lists. Now, yeah. Now, a dict or dictionary is a collection of key and value pairs which can be used to store data. You can create these by typing the variable name, then an equal sign, then a curly bracket, and then something which will act as the label of the key. So, and then you'll type a colon, which will separate the label and the key. Then you type something that you want to be that key, what you type before the label. And if you want another key or label in the same dictionary, put a comma to separate them, and repeat the process. And then you can add the variable with another curly bracket. Set is a collection of unique characters that are stored in no particular order and can be changed throughout your program. You can make one by saying the variable name, then an equal sign, and then a curly bracket to surround what you want it to equal, what you want the variable to be. Sets are useful to make sure there are no duplicate variables, because if there is, they'll never display duplicates. It's just It's just a rule of sets. An example of a set would be number equal curly bracket 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then another curly bracket. Now, a frozen set is similar to a set, but cannot be changed at all in your program. You can create these by typing the variable name, then an equal sign, and then frozen set, the word frozen set, and then a bracket, and then a square bracket, and then all the values you want to be in your frozen set, so type them all in, and then another square bracket, then another normal bracket. An example of a frozen set would be numbers equals frozen set, bracket, square bracket, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, square bracket, and bracket. The only real reason you want to use these instead of a normal set is that if you just don't want it to be changed at all in your program, like no chance of it. Now, none is a weird variable. It's a variable that essentially means that that variable equals nothing, and it could just be showed that that variable isn't important in the program, or if you have like two questions, like it's 1 equals yes, like it asks you a question, pick 1 or 2, and if it's like the wrong answer is 1, you pick none, and if it equals none, then you can use it for stuff like that. And to make one, you just do the variable name, then equals none, the word none, but make sure it's a capital N, because or else it doesn't work. Like if you do, I don't know, like if you do this, for example, right here, it won't work. And for example, you just do 1 equal none. Now, a bool or a boolean are variables that only have two settings, true or false. And they both also, like the none, have to be with a capital or else they won't work. These can be used a lot for a lot of different things like conditional statements and also while loops too. All you need to do for these to type them is to do the variable name, then equal true or false. Now, as I said earlier, these have a lot of uses for like conditional statements mainly, and also to keep while loops, and they're really important. So yeah. Now, complex numbers are numbers that are pretty I don't think we ever use them in this class. I don't think we will. But basically, the numbers can have a real and imaginary part. And the only real use is pretty complicated math equations for algebra and stuff. And in order to create one, you must do the variable name, then it equals, then any number, and then a plus sign, and then another number. But then make sure to type a J after the second number. The first number will be the real one, and the second will be the imaginary, which is the main thing of complex variables. Now on to how you can access variable types. Now almost any variable type can be accessed through any way by just typing the variable name in maybe a print function or a loop of any kind. And you can just do that, and unless it's to do with functions, like you can basically access it anywhere in the code. Unless you have functions, then we'll get into that later in the function video. But yeah. Now, changing variables can be done anytime through your code by either directly changing it, that's the way you change most variables, or adding to it if it's a float or int. Most other variables you can't add to, but floats or ints you can. And if you have a frozen set or tuple, you can never change those because that's just the ways those two are. So if you want to change these, make sure they're neither of these. And yeah. Oh, you can also change bool specifically by making it the opposite of what it is, basically meaning if it was false, you'd have to make it true to change it, equal true. Like if it originally equaled false, then if you made it equal true later, that's how you change it. And same thing, just the opposite if it equaled true. No, equaled false. So if it equaled false, the way you change it is if you made it equal true, and if it equaled true, you just make it equal false. Now, in my program specifically, I only really use ints and floats because so far I have not had any need for any other type of variable, and my game does have a lot of those two because it just needed them most. It uses ints for one of the big things I use an int for is the start screen. Basically, it's game state equal 1, and I change it directly each time. So each time if you hit backspace to start the game, when you're in the game start screen, it'll change it to 2, which will start the game, and then once you get a game over, it'll change it to 3, which is the game over. That's one of my big ints. I also use it to represent where the bird is on the y-axis. Since I have like 600, which is my y-axis, I think. The bird, whenever I hit backspace, its int variable will go up by 10. That's just an example. I don't remember the exact value, and it'll go up by 10. And that's an int. And I also use ints to represent the variables to represent the screen width and height. I only really use that for to make the screen like the display, but they're in there. They're two variables. I use a float for the gravity of the bird falling because I could have used an int, but I think 70.5, which is the value, was the most smooth falling speed because I personally felt that it was just the best speed. I also have an int variable that's just the user score. It goes up by 1 every time they go through pipes. And the last type of variable I use is a Boolean variable to keep both my while loops running. Because yeah, that's just what you do. And yeah, that is my variable video. Goodbye.